What if the most dangerous being in all of prophecy, the ultimate embodiment of human corruption, stood face to face with an ordinary person and simply could not lay a finger on them, not because of walls or weapons or angelic bodyguards, because of something spoken into existence before the first star ever ignited? There exists a document older than Christianity itself, a text so threatening to established religious power that it was systematically buried for over 1,000 years, surviving intact in only one place on Earth. That document makes a claim so audacious that most theologians refuse to engage with it directly. It says there is a category of human being that evil lacks the jurisdiction to harm, not the strength, the jurisdiction, and it names the single qualifying factor, something that has nothing to do with how good you are, where you were born, or what church you attend. It was locked into place before the planet cooled. This is the Book of Enoch's most dangerous promise, and by the time we're done here, you'll understand exactly what it means, why it was hidden from you, and whether it applies to your life right now. The entire biblical record on Enoch fits inside a single breath. Genesis chapter 5 runs through a long genealogy where every patriarch follows the same rhythm. Born, lived, fathered, children, died, name after name after name, all ending the same way. Then you hit Enoch and the rhythm shatters. The text says he walked with God and then he was not because God took him. No death, no funeral, no grave marker. Every other man in that genealogy gets a closing statement about dying, and Enoch just vanishes mid-sentence like someone pulled him through an invisible door. Genesis never explains what happened. It never tells you where he went or what he saw. It just moves on to the next name as though a man disappearing from reality required no further comment. That silence lasted roughly 2,000 years for most Western readers, but it wasn't always silent. Between the 3rd and 2nd centuries before the Common Era, a collection of texts began spreading through the communities of ancient Judea that claimed to fill that gap. These writings presented themselves as Enoch's first-hand testimony, his personal account of what he witnessed during that unexplained absence. Visions of heaven's architecture, a rebellion among angels, a courtroom scene at the end of all things, and woven through nearly every section one recurring declaration that a specific group of people living at the worst moment in human history would be categorically beyond the reach of whatever tried to destroy them. Now here's where the history gets inconvenient for anyone who wants to dismiss this as fringe mythology. The letter of Jude, which sits comfortably inside every New Testament ever printed, directly quotes the Book of Enoch by name and attributes prophetic authority to it. Jude reaches for Enoch's words the way a lawyer cites binding precedent, expecting his audience to already recognize the source. For roughly 300 years after the earliest Christian communities formed, Enoch circulated widely alongside the texts that would eventually become the New Testament canon. Early church fathers referenced it. Congregations read it. It shaped how 1st and 2nd century believers understood angels, judgment, and the structure of the unseen world. Then, across several centuries of institutional consolidation, the text quietly disappeared from Western Christianity, not through one dramatic vote or a single council's decree despite what some popular claims suggest. The actual process was slower and messier, a gradual narrowing of which texts got copied, which got shelved, and which got forgotten entirely. The end result was the same regardless of how it happened. A document that early Christians treated as near scriptural vanished from Western awareness and survived complete in exactly one tradition: the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which never removed it from their biblical canon and has preserved it continuously for longer than most Western denominations have existed. What makes the Book of Enoch remarkable isn't its angelology or its cosmic geography, though both are extraordinary. It's the way the text opens. Enoch doesn't begin with a creation narrative or a moral instruction manual. He begins with a direct address to people who haven't been born yet. He calls them the elect and the righteous, and he specifies that they will be alive during what he terms the day of tribulation, the precise moment when everything wicked is being actively stripped from the earth. This isn't a greeting card sentiment about good things happening to good people. It's a letter with a specific recipient and a specific delivery date, sealed centuries before either one exists. Within the first few passages, Enoch describes what that day looks like: mountains dissolving, the ground splitting open, judgment falling everywhere simultaneously. And then he drops the line that sets the entire text apart from generic apocalyptic literature. With the righteous he will make peace and will protect the elect, and mercy shall be upon them. That word protect is doing enormous work in that sentence. It doesn't say comfort, it doesn't say reward afterward. It says protect, present tense, in the middle of the catastrophe, while mountains are liquefying and the earth is tearing itself apart around them. This is a promise about surviving the worst moment in the history of the world while it is actively happening. And the fact that Enoch feels the need to make this promise so explicitly tells you something unsettling about whatever they're being protected from. You don't issue armor to someone who isn't standing near a weapon. If the threat couldn't reach them anyway, the promise would be unnecessary. Whatever is coming is close enough and powerful enough to destroy them without that specific intervention. The rest of the opening section, what scholars call the Book of the Watchers, identifies the source of that threat. It isn't described using the word Antichrist because that vocabulary belongs to a later Christian framework that hadn't developed yet. What Enoch describes is the machinery underneath that concept. A group of angelic beings led by a figure named Azazel who abandon their assigned positions in heaven, descend to earth, and begin systematically corrupting humanity. They teach weapon forging, sorcery, and the arts of seduction and manipulation, the entire toolkit of domination compressed into a curriculum delivered to a species that wasn't ready for any of it. Their hybrid offspring become a race of devastating giants who ravage the planet until the flood resets everything. That sequence is the original template. Every tyrant narrative that follows, including the beast system in Revelation and the figure later Christian theology calls the Antichrist, is built on Enoch's blueprint. Corrupt knowledge delivered from above, power concentrated in the wrong hands, an ongoing systematic attempt to reach, control, and consume people who belong to someone else. Scholar George Nicholsberg, one of the foremost academic authorities on 1st Enoch, makes a critical observation about how this pattern resurfaces later in the text. When the similitudes section introduces a group called the Kings and the Mighty, they aren't depicted as demons or supernatural monsters. They're described as corrupt political and religious elites whose authority rests on accumulated wealth, who openly deny any power above themselves and who actively persecute the faithful. Enoch's ultimate threat was never written as a single horned villain arriving on a predetermined schedule. It's a recurring pattern of earthly power that positions itself above accountability and treats every human life beneath it as available for the taking. That's more frightening than a lone supernatural antagonist because you don't need prophecy to fulfill it. You just need enough power in the wrong hands at the wrong time, and history has produced that configuration repeatedly. Chapter 62 is where Enoch stages the confrontation this entire text has been building toward, and it doesn't play out the way anyone steeped in action movie theology would expect. There's no battle, no dramatic clash between armies of light and darkness. What happens is a collapse. The Lord of Spirits addresses the kings and the mighty directly, almost tauntingly. Open your eyes and lift up your horns if you are able to recognize the elect one. It reads like a dare. Try to see him, try to reach what belongs to him. Go ahead, and what follows is devastating in its simplicity. Pain seizes them, the kind Enoch compares to the irreversible moment of childbirth, when the body has committed to a process that cannot be stopped or reversed. Their faces fall. They can't even maintain eye contact with the thing they came to take. The most powerful men on the planet, rulers who spent entire lifetimes believing that dominion meant nothing was beyond their grasp, discover in that instant that the truly untouchable ones were never them. Then the scene inverts completely. These same rulers end up on their faces in front of the figure they tried to overpower, begging for mercy from the very people they once persecuted. The charge against them is stated with surgical precision. They are condemned because they oppressed his children and his elect, not for some separate crime committed elsewhere. The reaching itself was the violation. The attempt to touch what was already claimed is what sealed their judgment. This is the detail that separates Enoch's vision from every shallow interpretation of spiritual protection. The untouchability isn't a force field. It isn't a glowing barrier the tyrant physically collides with and bounces off of. It's a categorical mismatch. The kings are reaching for something that was never within their jurisdiction, the same way you cannot purchase something that was never listed for sale. No amount of currency makes a difference when the item isn't on the market. Remember the tree Enoch describes earlier in the text, the one standing at the summit of a mountain shaped like a throne, fragrant and luminous, that no mortal is permitted to touch until Judgment Day. It wasn't surrounded by a fence. It wasn't guarded by a weapon. It was simply reserved, held for an owner who hadn't formally claimed it yet. And Enoch deliberately uses that same language of untouchability for the tree and later for a group of human beings. That repetition isn't accidental, it's structural. He's telling you these operate on the same principle: reserved, spoken for, not available. Everything up to this point has described what happens to the elect, protected, shielded, watching their persecutors crumble, but none of it has answered the essential question. Why them? Out of every human being across the entire span of history, what specifically qualifies this particular group for a protection that nothing can penetrate? Chapter 48 is where Enoch finally stops circling the answer and delivers it directly, and it's not what most people expect. Up to this point, the word elect sounds behavioral. The righteous ones, the people who did the right things and earned their reward. But chapter 48 dismantles that assumption completely. Enoch describes a figure called the Son of Man standing beside the head of days, an ancient title for the Creator, and then delivers the sentence that reframes everything. Before the sun and the signs were created, before the stars of heaven were made, his name was named before the Lord of Spirits, not chosen later, not appointed once the story was underway, named before time had a starting line to cross. Then Enoch connects that pretemporal name directly to the people this text has been promising to protect. For in his name they are saved. That single phrase is the load-bearing wall of the entire Book of Enoch. The elect aren't protected because they were strong enough. They aren't protected because they found the right hiding place or performed the correct rituals at the correct time. They're protected because they are aligned with a name that was established before the physical universe existed, which means the name predates every threat that could ever arise within that universe. The kings and the mighty in chapter 62 aren't failing because the elect outmuscled them. They're failing because they're reaching into territory that was claimed before their atoms were assembled. They're trying to steal from a vault that was locked before the concept of theft existed. No amount of power solves a jurisdictional problem that old. Here's where the text takes its most unexpected turn, and it's the part that makes this personally relevant rather than academically interesting. Enoch specifies that the elect themselves didn't automatically understand what protected them. Chapter 48 states that the wisdom of the Lord of Spirits revealed him to the holy and righteous. That word revealed is doing critical work. It means even the people standing inside that protection had to be shown what they were standing inside. They weren't born knowing. They weren't automatically enrolled by bloodline, nationality, or tribal membership. The name had to be disclosed to them, the way you cannot use a key you don't know you possess. This collapses every elitist reading of the text. The line between reachable and unreachable was never drawn at birth. It was drawn by whether you recognized and aligned yourself with something that existed before the world did once it was made known to you. Enoch reinforces this by giving the protecting figure multiple titles across these chapters. He's called the Son of Man, the elect one, the chosen one, and most revealingly, the concealed one. That last title appears repeatedly because the figure is meant to remain hidden until judgment demands his unveiling. The elect don't carry a visible brand a tyrant could scan for and target. Their protection is bound to something concealed, which is precisely why no amount of surveillance or military force could ever locate and neutralize it in advance. You cannot confiscate what you cannot perceive. Scholars have noted how closely this architecture mirrors the sealing of God's servants described in the Book of Revelation, where a mark is placed on foreheads before judgment falls, rendering those who carry it untouchable to the forces unleashed afterward. Enoch predates Revelation by centuries, and careful researchers are right to note these aren't identical texts describing an identical event, but the shared structural logic is impossible to ignore. A name or mark assigned before catastrophe, invisible to external observation, yet functioning as the absolute determining factor in who judgment can and cannot reach. Two documents separated by hundreds of years, independently arriving at the same image, because apparently it's the only way either author could articulate something that isn't physical yet operates like an impenetrable wall. Chapter 62 delivers the final verdict on what this alignment ultimately produces, and it deserves to be heard without paraphrase. The righteous and elect shall be saved on that day, and they shall never thenceforward see the face of the sinners and unrighteous. That isn't a temporary ceasefire, it's a permanent removal. The tyrant who once possessed the power to intrude upon their lives is not merely defeated but extracted from their reality entirely, erased from their field of perception forever. The reaching hand doesn't get pushed back. It gets deleted from the scene altogether. So the question this text ultimately poses isn't the one most people assume. It isn't whether some future Antichrist figure will be powerful. Enoch concedes that power freely. It isn't whether tribulation will be devastating. Enoch describes mountains melting and the planet splitting open. The question is simpler and more personal than any of that. Are you standing inside the name that was spoken before the stars? Or are you standing on the same open ground occupied by every ruler who ever reached for something that was never theirs? Because according to a text older than the New Testament, quoted by name within the New Testament, and preserved unbroken for over 2 millennia by a church that never saw reason to remove it, that single distinction is the only one that matters when the reaching finally begins. And if that reshapes how you think about what protects you, consider this. Enoch doesn't stop at who survives the tribulation. He goes further into what happens to a soul in the moments immediately following death, long before any final judgment unfolds. According to his account, that transition contains something most people walk directly into without ever realizing what just happened. That's a question for next time.